Hello everyone, good evening, and it's my honor today to present the 700th lecture. 700! It's rather impressive. I don't think anyone can beat that on YouTube or anything similar. And we crossed so many different subjects, so I'm amazed that there are still some small uncovered, but it's an incredibly large base, and I took the liberty to check the normal curriculum at Yale for philosophy and philosophy of science and cognition science, and it seemed that we covered a lot of those different subjects in this 700 episode sequel. We will see what happened in the last 300 lectures. I'm looking forward to be even more familiar with all strands of knowledge. But let us uncover somebody who hasn't entered us so far, and he's one of those really well-known philosopher figures, Thomas Nagel. And why we haven't mentioned him? Well, we have indirectly. I mentioned his name and his book title. But it's very interesting. It's one of those most discussed philosophy books or literary books or whatever book the last couple of decades. It's called The View from Nowhere, and it's in a way not very difficult. It's trying to cover two different modes of being or understanding, if you like. And we all know about these modes. One mode is maybe even the default mode we always have, and the other one is a developed mode. And especially those of you who have children knows exactly that a child at the age of 3, 4, 5, somewhere there in that vicinity, can actually be shown that there are other viewpoints than their own. And this is what Nagel called the outside mode, or the view from outside. How somebody else is perceiving something. A common thing to say to the children is, how would you feel if somebody did that to you as you did to that child? And that could wake the child to an understanding it's also an outside somewhere. Whereas the inside mode, it's more natural. You have that from the beginning anyway. The outside mode is usually also default mode for science. And Nagel looks upon this and tries to figure out if that's really necessary. Could there not be another way? Or is it really so that the inside mode is not fit for science? And here is a very important thing I added myself, and that is, one should never ever forget that the O mode is also coming from the subject. It's not like we can leave our old bodies and actually see ourselves from the outside. So even the O mode is something that we, so to speak, produce as individuals. And another thing to ponder is that the O mode is a later development, and it does not actually develop or being developed by everyone. Some people just have the first, or this, well, in this case, second mode, the inside mode. One has also pondered about whether animals do have this outside mode. There are some pointers to that when it comes to the apes, that they can understand that somebody is looking at them from the outside. But it's not at all as developed and keen and clear. This is, in some reason, very similar to Ian McGilchrist's right and left hemisphere, but it is interestingly enough, in another way, extremely dissimilar, and I think that's interesting. One way of explaining the left and the right hemisphere is by making riddles. And one such riddle is, Tom is taller than Joe and Alan is taller than Tom. Who is tallest? And if you ask the hemispheres, which you can actually do, you can isolate the hemisphere, both would say that Alan is the tallest. But here comes the odd stuff. If you ask the hemispheres, well, very well, but who's shortest? Then the left hemisphere cannot change the order, whereas for the right hemisphere it comes instantly. Of course, Joe is shortest, because he takes the last lead in the tall series, and then he, of course, is the shortest. But the left hemisphere has a big problem seeing things from the outside. That's really interesting. I think most people, without reading too much novel, would say that maybe the left hemisphere is science and the outside mode. There's an interesting difference here. Those discrepancies are often very, very telling, and they can actually broaden knowledge somehow, so you don't get stuck in one track. Maybe another way of seeing it is to the problems we have in mathematics and atomic theory, where we sort of have problems to say if a thing is just an object, or if a thing is more of a sort of having meaning, purpose, or a thing is just a name. All those things are different. And that gets meddled a lot when you have just the outside mode, because the outside mode doesn't make any difference between, so to speak, meaning and object. It's the same thing for the outside mode. But we know that causes problems. Of course, once again, Gödel, which is very important to remember, that is not something to be understood, but something to be remembered. We have to adjust for Gödel. He shows the limits. We have to follow. One other thing with this, there could be a problem, doesn't have to be a problem, and he's hinting to the OMO to function. You will have to even understand that it's coming from your own subject. When you understand that, the O mode is functionable. But if you don't understand that, you think everybody has the same O mode. That's very interesting. Then you have a big problem. And this is what he says, the stereotypical view, when you don't understand what objectivity is. Objectivity always starts with understanding it's your objectivity. If you don't understand that, it's no objectivity anymore. It's pure subjectivity. And of course, for the O mode working well, it has to work with several meanings at the same time, because everyone has their, her, or his meaning. And in a way, that is also how language works. Language could not be working with a singular meaning, because that had to mean, this is rather complicated, but that had to mean that we only have one O mode, but it's not coming from anyone. It's an O mode hanging in the air. And that Nagel says is a sort of a mistake to think that. It's a lack of knowledge. And such a person cannot understand the O mode because it's very powerful when you understand it. A lot of our development has been made thanks to it, and a lot of knowledge also comes from the O mode, because we can see everything from the outside, as long as we understand it's coming from ourselves or somebody else also. So one could say that the O mode is the objective view but with a twist. And we mentioned before an obvious symptom of a person who doesn't understand that the O mode is coming from himself or somebody else. And that's this idea that one word has only one meaning, which is actually, according to Nagel, it's really, really bad mistake to make. He writes it's the impossible mistake to think that, because it takes that you have to be some sort of supernatural being. Not even a supernatural being could do it, I would think. It has to be something not supernatural, not natural, not anything. And he writes very poetically, in many ways the history of philosophy, ethics, law and several other topics could be told through the lens of man's endless attempts to reconcile his partial subjective viewpoint with his longing for an objective certainty that remains elusive. And we who studied philosophy, we are well aware of the battles that have been fought over which should be the way to be taken to have a reconciliation between the two. Big fight between idealism and empiricism is one to mention, but in modern days we have people who mean that every word only has one meaning, and those who means it has several meanings. And it's still a battle going on, maybe in each person as well. Nagel says that Platonism is the most extreme form of the outside mood, or a twisted, well, in another way, twisted view of the objective form. And in this view, one says that the second mood coming from the subject is actually coming from this one, the outside mood. It's really weird. I'm not sure that Plato actually thought that. I understand what he means. In some way, Plato might say there is an ideal form of the I, and that I exists objectively. And my present I, or my present me, is a derived thing from that ideal form. But yeah, maybe that's what Plato thought. But there are definitely people today that think that, there's no doubt. Philosophy is full of them today, maybe the majority, even I don't know, think that the self is made of outside parts. And that's so weird because we know in the development of an individual, the outside part comes second. And we also know if there is any question about something, the inside part is always number one to decide what will happen. So there's a lot of argument against that sort of thinking. And he makes a punch towards reductionism, because they all share similar trait together with idealism, and that's an inappropriate appropriation of objectivity. It's a little bit like I said before, there's people who forgot that the objectivity is coming from themselves. The outside mode is from themselves, and in that way they pervert the objective, make it subjective and not clean anymore. And that is reductionism. You make a tremendous mistake and you start saying, just like Nagel thought that Plato meant, you start saying that the outside is what starts and it's the thing that made up the inside. And that's a problem with order. So what comes first? What is first in the hierarchy? First in the hierarchy is the inside. It starts with the inside. Can't start anywhere else when you think of it. And the second mistake is to think for some reason that the outside mode would be more pure somehow. Both those are rather severe errors of thinking. And according to Nagel, that is the same as the proclamation of everything being explicable via physical processes, or any other reductive modes like logicism, mathematics. And this is when you start looking at it just an assertion, and quite a dangerous assertion at that. Because when we reduce non-physical entities to the physical realm, we necessarily rob them of something essential and mysterious. The methods of natural science were designed to explain why apples fall from trees and why wooden boxes float in water, not why King Lear's daughters betrayed him or why the death of an innocent person is tragic. Some, perhaps many things cannot be explained as some sort of inevitable necessary interaction between protons, electrons, quarks, or whatever else we may claim that all reality is derived from. So he's not at any level attacking the outside mode, but what he says, there is an inappropriate appropriation of the outside mode. Using it in the wrong way, you say it's not coming from oneself, and that's a problem with hierarchy, and that's a problem with also what is more important. And the second thing is that once you start doing that mistake can actually spread. That makes it dangerous. And it's a little bit like domino. If one brick falls, all the other falls. And here you have like a massive heap of bricks in the end falling together. We put ourselves and others out of balance by timing everything wrong. But you can just imagine, it's a rather big mistake that somewhere in your growing up phase, just an example, that maybe you are at the age of 15, 16, 17, you make the mistake because somebody disturbs you or you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and all of a sudden you start thinking, maybe the outside mode is coming first, and maybe the outside mode is not coming from me personally. And then you stop to think. Of course, that gets established and that becomes a habit, and that is a dangerous habit, and it spreads. It has spread already. It's infected knowledge, authority, and it's affected institutional knowledge, and it's even affected media and politics as well, I'd say. It's a very, very dangerous idea because it's contagious. Could be, I think it could be compared to speech impediment. There is a rumor that is probably not true, but it will serve as an idea what could have happened. Someone said that a certain king of Spain had a lisp, and for some reason that lisp started to become language. And that would be the reason why Spanish today has lisp. I don't think so, but this goes to show what could spread if a king sort of assumes a lisp or has a lisp, and people start thinking that's fanciful. There are examples in that area that are true. There was a king that had some sort of spasm and that turned into a gesture, like a greeting like this one. So it could happen. But it's definitely happening with this outside mode. It is spreading more and more. And it's getting people out of balance. They see hierarchies where there are no hierarchies, and they don't see what is more important because they start to look before they think. And you hear, this is the major mistake. There is a quote I really liked in the book, and that is not from Nagel, it's from Cormac McCarthy. And he said, only nature can enslave man, and only when the existence of each last entity is rooted out and made to stand naked before him, will he be properly suzerain of the earth. And what it is, science has become the new handmaiden of philosophical salvation. And this, I think he has a very strong point here, because we are all falling for this. And that's also the reason that we think that words today carry their meaning, no matter who says them and where they're coming from. And this is this export-import of words between different cultures. And then you say, well, I know exactly the same thing that person know when he wrote that in, for instance, French, English, or something like that. It's horrible nonsense. It can't be more stupid. Englishman with a different culture of 2,000 years writes something, it has to be different what I would have written. And my interpretation of that cannot be the same. There's no chance in hell. So it's a grave mistake, but it's still so easy to make. And the reason Nagel points out is that so many is making it. That's the reason. Because when many makes the same mistake, it's so easy to fall into the same mistake. And then it doesn't matter if the mistake is grave and stupid, because the mass makes the mistake more easy. And my own explanation of that is also to do with proper rhythm, because this is a lack of order. And I think, who said that? Dead Poets Society. Robin Williams, the main character, makes an example of when everybody is marching in one pace, da, 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 it's very hard for one person to walk in another pace. And I think that is the reason we all fall into this mistake, because there's so many to do today, and it's a matter of rhythm. Once you got into the wrong rhythm, it's so hard to jank yourself out of that rhythm, because you don't have anything objective to lead you. Everybody is skewed around you. Everything around you is wrong. So he writes like this. He's quite a writer now. Once we realize the subjectively bounded nature of man's objective capacity, we should be highly suspicious of any methodology that claims to have reached an objective perspective without also acknowledging and incorporating the undeniable subjectivity that reality is populated with. Truth be told, no any equivocal satisfying answer to this problem may be attainable, and the mating of the subjective and objective selves has been more apt to breed absurdity than certainty. After all, how do you construct either subjectivity or objectivity out of 200 pounds of subatomic particles? Which is what natural science as a human being ultimately amounts to. So Nagel is interesting. He doesn't put down the knife at any instance of the book, but he becomes sharper at the end of the book. And he pinpoints in the bottom of this mistake is, of course, stupidity. There is a grave mistake. This is not intelligence talking at all. And that's the main reason for it staying. Were it an hypothesis, a philosophical idea, it would have been different, because that can be disputed. But against stupidity, man has no means. We cannot defend us against stupidity. It's impossible. You can compare that, Ian McGilchrist, I think. No, who was that? I don't know who I would try to find out who said it from the beginning. But he said there can be no one more rational than a madman. Because a madman, he cannot take in reality. Therefore, his rationality becomes so sharp, so intense, and so quick, you cannot defend yourself against it. Because he doesn't have reality to make him uncertain. So this certainty that people has today, that's lack of knowledge. That's definitely lack of knowledge. And the more certainty you have, you more fall into the same rhythm. I think it's sort of interesting. And I think this, although now Nagel's book has a couple of decades, it is still very much to the point. Of course, there are some aspects of Nagel's book that are maybe a bit outdated, but the main point is even more acute today than it ever was. And I think his conclusion is very interesting. It's not a philosophical standpoint, it's just stupidity. And that is no defense against. And I never thought about that before. There's some understanding that came with Nagel, because he is definitely sharp. And he of course pinpoints this has made human beings, how do you say, the stupidity spreads into the soul, that make people very, very barren. All literature went out to the window. We spoke the other day about Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind. This is of course connected to this. What's the reason to have actual knowledge where you can have make-up knowledge, and you can call it objective? And there are other things that sort of degraded human beings. And there's also a sort of greedy aspect. It's something very, how do you say, luring, or it's a deep desire to have access to direct knowledge without doing the work. I think that's another thing. Laziness does play a part, because learning things takes a lot of time, and this outside mode without a subjective point makes it so easy. You just need to have the words. You don't have to have the context or the background. And if somebody says to you, how do you know you have the right meaning of the words? Well, then you just have to say that the words are monosemic. They only have one meaning. You see how all the things comes together? Because you need this thing to cover this thing, and then you need this thing, and you need this thing. You need all 5 or 4, 6 things, or 10 in the end, to sort of fix every position. Because no, it's very interesting, Nagel. What Nagel did actually, this is another thing, has nothing to do with the book. But when the book came out, Nagel is a cynic, of course. He doesn't believe much in illusions. He's a dead-born atheist. What did Nagel cause in the United States? Have you any idea? This is the surprise here. He started a whole wave of Christian philosophers. Never existed before, but thanks to these standpoints, he sort of woken people to one of the reasons that Christianity disappears in the intellectual strata in the United States is because of this outside mode taken to be objective. That's what we usually call East Coast intellectualism. It's a bit leftist, and it has some traits of atheism, and that grows strong through time now. So now there's a whole strand of Christian epistemologists and ordinary philosophers, and the most famous one, I'd say, is Alvin Plantinga, the favorite of Mats Lander. Although he's, well, he's 1 or 2 years later than Nagel, and I think he got inspired by Nagel. That's my idea. Although he says that he got his idea himself. And now we must celebrate the 700th episode, and this is Swedish pepparkaka.
Oj, 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 oj.
I haven't had time to bake it, but apparently, according to my colleague Kalle Lundahl, that's not a problem, because the dough can be eaten as it is, and it will not cause tummy ache.
Oj, 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 oj.
So I can give a spoon to Kalle. You can take a spoon.
Oj, excuse me.
Yeah.
I
can serve you. Here you go.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oj,
Let's taste the dough. This is gluten-free. And I think the cookies made from gluten-free is better. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.